She was about to be sold in the churchyard until a widowed rancher stepped onto the altar. The autumn wind whipped through the sparse congregation gathered in the weathered churchyard of Millbrook, Montana territory, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and the bitter promise of winter. Eleanor Hartwell stood on the makeshift auction block, nothing more than an overturned wooden crate, her chin raised defiantly despite the humiliation that burned through her veins like poison. "What am I bid for this fine specimen?" bellowed Silas Crow, the town's self-appointed auctioneer, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man who had sold everything from livestock to human dignity. "She's got all her teeth, can read and write, and comes with a decent dowry of $50. Eleanor's hands trembled within the folds of her worn blue dress, the same dress she'd worn to her father's funeral just 2 weeks prior. The same dress she'd worn when the bank had foreclosed on their small farm. The same dress she'd worn when her uncle had declared her unmarriageable burden and decided that selling her to the highest bidder was the most expedient solution to his newfound guardianship. "I'll start the bidding at $20. Crow continued, his yellowed teeth gleaming in the pale October sunlight. A rough voice called out from the crowd. Eleanor's stomach lurched as she recognized the speaker, Marcus Tully, a man whose wife had died under mysterious circumstances the previous spring, and whose reputation for cruelty toward women was whispered about in the darkest corners of Millbrook's general store. There came another voice, this one belonging to Henrik Olsen, a Norwegian immigrant whose 3 previous wives had all died in childbirth. The pattern was becoming disturbingly clear. Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to transport herself somewhere else, anywhere else. She thought of her mother's garden, where sweet peas had climbed wooden trellises and honeysuckle had perfumed the evening air. She thought of her father's gentle hands as he'd taught her to read by lamplight, his voice soft and patient as he'd explained that education was the one thing no one could ever take from her. How wrong he had been. "Do I hear Fort Crow's voice?" seemed to come from a great distance, as if Eleanor were drowning and his words were mere echoes from the surface world above. 40. Tully's voice was eager now, hungry. Eleanor opened her eyes and scanned the crowd, searching for any face that might show mercy, any person who might see her as more than chattel to be bartered. Most of the townspeople averted their gazes, their discomfort with the proceedings evident in their shuffling feet and downturned eyes. A few watched with the morbid fascination of spectators at a public hanging. 45. Olsen counted, and Eleanor felt her fate sealing itself around her like a shroud. It was then that she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, not the gentle clip-clop of a farm horse, but the thunderous gallop of an animal being ridden hard and fast. The crowd turned as one toward the source of the sound, and Eleanor found herself craning her neck to see past the wall of bonnets and hat brims. A lone rider appeared at the edge of the churchyard, his horse's flanks heaving from exertion. The man sat tall in his saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the grey sky. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see that his clothes spoke of prosperity, not the ostentatious wealth of an Eastern dandy, but the practical effluence of a man who had built something substantial with his own hand. The rider dismounted with fluid grace and strode through the crowd, which parted before him like wheat before a scythe. As he drew closer, Eleanor could make out his features more clearly. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that showed the beginnings of silver at the temples, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by the kind of lines that spoke of a man who had known both laughter and sorrow in equal measure. "What's the current bid?" the stranger asked, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made even Silas Crow straighten his shoulders unconsciously. $45, Miss Donovan," Crow stammered, and Eleanor noticed the way the man's name seemed to ripple through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Donovan. She had heard that name before, whispered in the same tones reserved for legends and ghost stories. James Donovan, owner of the largest ranch in 3 counties, a man who had arrived in Montana Territory with nothing but the clothes on his back and had built an empire through sheer determination and an iron will. A man whose wife had died in a riding accident 2 years prior, leaving him to raise their young daughter alone. 50, Donovan said simply, his gaze never wavering from Eleanor's face. 60, Tully shot back, his voice taking on a note of desperation. 100, Donovan replied without hesitation, and the churchyard fell silent save for the whisper of wind through the bare branches overhead. Eleanor felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at this stranger who had just bid an astronomical sum for her hand. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, not the predatory gleam she had seen in Tully's and Olson's gazes, but something else entirely. Respect, perhaps, or merely cold calculation. $100, Crow exclaimed, his voice cracking with excitement. Do I hear 110? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Tully spat into the dirt and stalked away, muttering curses under his breath. Olson followed suit, shaking his head in defeat. Going once, Crow called out. Going twice, his gavel, nothing more than a smooth river stone, hovered in the air. Sold to Mr. James Donovan for $100. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment concluded, but Eleanor remained frozen on her makeshift platform. She watched as Donovan approached Silas Crow and handed over a roll of bills with the casual indifference of a man buying a sack of grain. The paperwork? Donovan inquired. Right here, Mr. Donovan, Crow said, producing a sheaf of documents from his coat pocket. Just need both parties to sign, and she's yours legal and proper. Eleanor's uncle, Josiah Hartwell, materialized at Crow's elbow like a carrion bird scenting death. A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Donovan, he said, his voice oily with false sincerity. She's a good worker, minimal complaints. You won't have any trouble with her. Donovan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained level. I'll be the judge of that. He turned to Eleanor, then extending his hand to help her down from the crate. His palm was warm and calloused, speaking of honest labor, and his grip was firm but not painful. Miss Hartwell, he said, his voice gentler now that they were standing face to face. I'm James Donovan. I realize this is unconventional, but I'd like to speak with you privately before we proceed. Eleanor found her voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I'm afraid I don't have much choice in the matter, Mr. Donovan. The documents have been signed. A shadow of something, anger perhaps, or disgust, flickered across his features. There are always choices, Miss Hartwell. Sometimes they're not pleasant ones, but they exist nonetheless. He gestured toward a small grove of aspen trees at the far edge of the churchyard. Would you walk with me? Eleanor glanced back at her uncle, who was already counting his money with undisguised glee, and nodded. They walked in silence until they were well out of earshot of the remaining stragglers. Miss Hartwell, Donovan began, then stopped and removed his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair. I want you to understand something. What happened back there, what your uncle did to you, it's unconscionable. No woman should be treated like property to be sold to the highest bidder. Eleanor felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She had shed enough tears over the past 2 weeks to last a lifetime. Then why did you bid on me? She asked, surprising herself with the directness of her question. Donovan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains that rose like sleeping giants against the horizon. My daughter, Lucy, is 7 years old, he said finally. She's been without a mother for 2 years now, and I've been at a loss. The ranch is prosperous, but what good is prosperity when your child cries herself to sleep every night because she misses her mama? He turned to face Eleanor fully, and she was struck by the raw honesty in his storm-gray eyes. I need help, Miss Hartwell. Not just with Lucy, but with the household, with bringing some semblance of normalcy back to our lives. When I heard about what was happening here today, I thought perhaps we could help each other. You're offering me employment? Eleanor asked. hardly daring to hope. "I'm offering you a choice," Donovan replied. "You can come with me to the ranch as my wife in name only, if that's your preference. You'll have your own room, your own space, and complete autonomy over the household. In return, you'll help me care for Lucy and manage the domestic side of the ranch." Or, he paused, reaching into his vest pocket and withdrawing a small leather pouch. "Or I can give you this enough money to buy passage to San Francisco, or Denver, or wherever you'd like to start fresh. And we can tell the good people of Millbrook that you've decided you're not ready for marriage after all." Eleanor stared at the pouch in amazement. "You would do that? You would let me simply leave?" "The choice is yours, Miss Hartwell, but I hope you'll at least consider the first option. Lucy needs someone who understands what it's like to lose everything. She needs someone who knows how to rebuild from ashes." The wind picked up, sending a shower of golden aspen leaves spiraling down around them like nature's confetti. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. Her father's death, the foreclosure, her uncle's callous indifference to her fate. She thought of the long, uncertain road that awaited her, if she chose to leave, the dangers that a woman alone would face in the frontier territories. But more than that, she thought of a 7-year-old girl who cried herself to sleep every night, longing for a mother's comfort. "What was she like?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Your wife?" Donovan's expression grew distant, touched with a sadness that seemed to emanate from his very bones. She was sunshine and laughter and everything good about this harsh world. She could make a meal from scraps and have you believing it was a feast fit for kings. She could sing Lucy to sleep with lullabies that seemed to come from some ancient magic. She made our house a home. "I'm not her," Eleanor said quietly. "I know," Donovan replied. "I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be yourself, whatever that means to you." Eleanor looked back toward the churchyard, where her uncle was no doubt already calculating how to spend his blood money. She thought of Marcus Tully and Henrik Olsen, of the fate that had awaited her mere minutes ago. She thought of her father's words about education being something no one could take from her, and she realized that perhaps he had been right after all. Her education had given her the wisdom to recognize an honorable man when she saw one. "I'll come with you," she said, and felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen for the first time in weeks. Donovan's relief was visible, though he tried to hide it behind a mask of practical composure. "Thank you, Miss Hartwell. I promise you won't regret this decision." They walked back toward the churchyard together, and Eleanor felt the eyes of the remaining townspeople upon them as they approached Donovan's horse, a magnificent bay stallion that stood at least 16 hands high. "Can you ride?" Donovan asked. "Yes, though it's been some time," Eleanor admitted. "We'll go slowly. It's only about an hour to the ranch." He helped her mount behind him, and Eleanor tried to ignore the solid warmth of his back against her chest as they set off down the dusty road that led away from Millbrook. The landscape that unfolded before them was breathtaking in its stark beauty. Rolling hills covered in autumn grass that glowed gold in the afternoon sunlight. Stands of cottonwood and aspen trees that had traded their summer green for brilliant yellow and orange. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks already dusted with the season's first snow. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, and she felt rather than saw Donovan's smile. "Catherine used to say that God saved the best canvas for Montana," he said. "I'm inclined to agree with her." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's gait gradually soothing Eleanor's frayed nerves. She found herself studying the man before her, the confident set of his shoulders, the easy way he handled the reins, the occasional gesture he made to point out a landmark or feature of the landscape. "Tell me about Lucy," she said as they crested a hill and began their descent toward a valley dotted with cattle. She's everything to me," Donovan said simply. "Bright as a new penny, stubborn as a mule, and brave enough to face down a grizzly bear if she thought it was the right thing to do. She looks just like her mother, blonde hair that refuses to stay braided, blue eyes that see everything, freckles across her nose from too much time in the sun." His voice grew quieter. "She's been having nightmares since Catherine died. Sometimes I hear her talking to her mother's photograph, asking when she's coming home. I've tried to explain that death is permanent, But how do you make a 7-year-old understand that some kinds of broken can't be fixed? Eleanor felt her heart clench with sympathy. Perhaps you don't try to make her understand, she said gently. Perhaps you just help her learn to carry the sadness in a way that doesn't break her spirit. Donovan reined in the horse and turned to look at her over his shoulder. You sound like you speak from experience. My mother died when I was 12, Eleanor explained. Consumption. For months afterward, I was angry at her for leaving me, angry at God for taking her, angry at the world for continuing to turn as if nothing had changed. My father let me rage and grieve and ask all the questions that had no good answer. He never tried to rush me through it or convince me to feel differently than I did. He just held space for my sorrow until I was ready to let joy back in, alongside it. And did you let joy back in? Eleanor considered the question carefully. Eventually and before, tempered by loss, perhaps more precious because I understood how fragile it was. But yes, joy found its way back. Donovan nodded slowly and turned back to face the road ahead. I hope you can help Lucy find that path. I hope so too. The Donovan ranch appeared before them as they rounded a bend in the road, a sprawling complex of buildings that spoke of prosperity and careful planning. The main house was a 2-story structure built of honey-colored logs, with a wide front porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Barns and outbuildings dotted the surrounding area, and Eleanor could see horses grazing in fenced paddocks and cattle scattered across the distant pastures. It's magnificent, she said, and meant it. Catherine designed most of it, Donovan said, and Eleanor heard the pride and pain warring in his voice. She said a home should embrace its family, not just shelter them. They rode up the circular drive to the front of the house, where a small figure sat on the porch steps, her chin propped on her hands in an attitude of dejection that was unmistakable even from a distance. That's Lucy, Donovan said unnecessarily. As they drew closer, Eleanor could see that Donovan's description had been accurate. The child was indeed a miniature version of what Catherine must have been, with golden hair that had escaped its braids to frame her heart-shaped face, and enormous blue eyes that watched their approach with wariness. Donovan dismounted and helped Eleanor down before approaching his daughter. Lucy, I'd like you to meet Miss Eleanor Hartwell. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Lucy's gaze flicked between her father and Eleanor, with the calculating intelligence of a child who had learned too early to read the undercurrents of adult behavior. Is she going to be my new mama? She asked with the bluntness that only children possess. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn, but Donovan answered with admirable composure. Miss Hartwell is going to help us take care of the house and each other. We'll see what develops from there. Lucy stood up and walked down the porch steps with the measured dignity of a princess granting an audience. She stopped directly in front of Eleanor and looked up at her with those piercing blue eyes. Do you know how to braid hair? She asked. Eleanor smiled, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Yes, I do. Do you know how to read? Papa taught me. Do you like horses? Very much. Do you like stories? Mama used to tell me stories every night before bed. Lucy's voice grew small. Papa tries, but he's not very good at the voices. Eleanor glanced at Donovan, who shrugged with good-natured embarrassment. I'm afraid my repertoire is somewhat limited, he admitted. Well then, Eleanor said, crouching down to Lucy's eye level, perhaps we can remedy that situation. I know quite a few stories, and I'm told I do excellent voices. For the first time since their arrival, Lucy's serious expression cracked into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Could you tell me one tonight? I would be honored to. Lucy nodded solemnly, as if sealing a pact, then turned and skipped up the porch step. I'll show you where your room is, she called over her shoulder. Eleanor followed the child into the house, with Donovan bringing up the rear. The interior was as welcoming as the exterior had promised, warm wood floors covered with colorful rugs, furniture that invited comfort rather than mere admiration, and everywhere the subtle touches that spoke of a woman's loving attention to detail. Catherine's influence, Donovan said quietly, noticing Eleanor's appreciative gaze. I've tried to keep everything just as she left it. Lucy led them up a staircase to the second floor, chattering as she went. This is Papa's room, she said, pointing to a door at the end of the hall. "And this is my room." She pushed open a door to reveal a cheerful space decorated in shades of yellow and white, with a small bed covered in what appeared to be a hand-stitched quilt, depicting various farm animals. "And this," Lucy continued, opening the door directly across the hall, "is the guest room. Mama always said it had the best view of the mountains." Eleanor stepped inside and caught her breath. The room was lovely, spacious and airy, with windows that looked out over the valley toward the snow-capped peaks in the distance. The bed was covered with a quilt in shades of blue and green that seemed to echo the colors of the landscape beyond the glass. "It's perfect," Eleanor said, and meant it. "I'll let you get settled," Donovan said from the doorway. "Dinner is usually around 6. Mrs. Patterson, she's our cook, will be delighted to have another woman in the house. She's been lecturing me about the sorry state of our domestic arrangements for months." After he left, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. This morning she had awakened in her uncle's cramped house, facing a future that held nothing but fear and degradation. Now she found herself in a beautiful room in a prosperous ranch house, with a chance to build something new from the ruins of her old life. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Lucy peeked around the doorframe. "Papa said I should let you rest, but I wanted to ask you something." "Of course. What is it?" Lucy entered the room and closed the door behind her with the conspiratorial air of someone about to share a secret. "Do you think my mama can see me from heaven?" The question hit Eleanor like a physical blow, so unexpected and heartbreaking in its innocence. She patted the bed beside her, and Lucy climbed up to sit next to her. "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that love doesn't end just because someone dies. I think your mama's love for you is still here, still real, even though she can't be here with you in the way you want her to. Papa says she's watching over me, but sometimes I feel really alone anyway." "Is that bad?" "Oh, sweetheart. No, it's not bad at all. Missing someone you love isn't something you can just stop doing because other people tell you to. It's one of the ways we honor the people we've lost, by letting ourselves feel sad that they're gone." Lucy was quiet for a moment, swinging her legs back and forth over the side of the bed. "Do you miss your mama?" "Every day," Eleanor admitted. "But I also carry her with me in all the things she taught me, all the ways she loved me. Those things don't disappear just because she's not here anymore." "Maybe," Lucy said thoughtfully, "you could teach me some of the things your mama taught you, and I could teach you some of the things my mama taught me. That way we'd both have more pieces of our mamas to carry around." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, but these were different from the bitter tears she had shed over the past weeks. These were tears of recognition, of connection, of hope. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said, and was rewarded with Lucy's first genuine smile since her arrival. That evening, Eleanor found herself seated at a dining table that could have accommodated a dozen people but felt intimate with just the three of them gathered at one end. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman with graying hair and kind eyes, had outdone herself preparing a welcome dinner of roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden, and fresh bread that steamed when broken open. "It's so nice to have another lady at the table," Miss Patterson declared as she served generous portions. "Mr. Donovan and Miss Lucy are fine company, but sometimes a woman needs another woman to talk to, if you know what I mean." Eleanor smiled. "I completely understand, Mrs. Patterson. This meal is absolutely delicious. Please call me Sarah. We don't stand on ceremony here." The older woman beamed with pleasure. "Mr. Donovan told me you're from back east originally." "Pennsylvania," Eleanor confirmed. "My father and I moved here when I was 15 after my mother passed away. He thought the climate might be better for his health." "And was it?" Donovan asked. Eleanor's expression grew sad. For a time, he lived 5 years longer than the doctors had predicted. But consumption is a patient enemy. It waits and watches, and eventually claims its prize. "I'm sorry for your loss," Donovan said quietly, and Eleanor could hear in his voice the understanding of someone who had walked the same dark path. "Thank you. He was a good man, a teacher by profession, a philosopher by temperament. He believed that education and kindness could cure most of the world's ills." "He sounds like someone I would have liked to know," Donovan said. "I think you would have gotten along splendidly. He had a deep appreciation for people who built things, Not just houses or businesses, but lives, communities, legacies. Lucy, who had been listening to this exchange with the grave attention children bring to adult conversations they don't fully understand, suddenly piped up. "Miss Eleanor, will you tell me a story tonight like you promised?" "Of course. What kind of story would you like to hear?" "Something with horses," Lucy said immediately. "And maybe a princess. But not a silly princess who just sits around waiting to be rescued. A brave princess who rescues herself." Eleanor laughed. "I think I know just the story." After dinner, the three of them retired to the living room, where a fire crackled merrily in the stone fireplace. Lucy curled up on the sofa next to Eleanor, while Donovan settled into a leather armchair with a book, though Eleanor noticed he seemed more interested in listening than reading. "Once upon a time," Eleanor began, "in a kingdom where the horses ran wild and free across endless plains, there lived a princess named Aria, who loved nothing more than to ride." As she wove the tale of Princess Aria and her magical horse Windstorm, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. The warmth of the fire, the weight of Lucy's head growing heavy against her shoulder, the comfortable presence of Donovan listening from his chair, it all combined to create a sense of belonging that she had thought was lost to her forever. "And they lived happily ever after," she concluded softly, looking down to find that Lucy had fallen asleep against her arm. "That was beautifully told," Donovan said quietly, setting aside his book and rising to lift his daughter. "Catherine would have loved that story." As he carried Lucy upstairs to bed, Eleanor remained by the fire, staring into the dancing flames and marveling at the strange turns her life had taken. When Donovan returned, he poured himself a whiskey and offered one to Eleanor, who accepted gratefully. "I want to thank you," he said, settling back into his chair. "I haven't seen Lucy that relaxed in months. You have a gift with children." "She's a remarkable little girl," Eleanor replied. "You and Catherine did well with her." "Catherine did well with her," Donovan corrected. "I've been stumbling around in the dark since she died, trying to figure out how to be both father and mother to a child who needs more than I knew how to give." Eleanor studied his profile in the firelight, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry a weight that was almost visible. "May I ask how Catherine died?" Donovan was quiet for so long that Eleanor began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "She was riding her mare, a spirited horse named Stella that she'd raised from a foal. Something spooked the animal, and Catherine was thrown. She hit her head on a rock and never woke up. I'm so sorry. The worst part," Donovan continued, staring into his whiskey, "is that I should have been with her. She asked me to come along that morning, but I was too busy with ranch business, too important to spend an afternoon riding with my wife." His laugh was bitter. "I've had 2 years to regret that decision, and I suspect I'll have the rest of my life to perfect that regret." Eleanor leaned forward in her chair. "Mr. Donovan, James, you can't blame yourself for every choice that led to that moment. Catherine chose to ride that day. The horse chose to spook. Fate chose to intervene in the cruelest possible way. You made a decision based on the information you had at the time. The same way we all make dozens of decisions every day. You couldn't have known. Couldn't." His gray eyes met hers, and she saw a pain so raw and deep that it took her breath away. "I was her husband. I was supposed to protect her. You were her partner," Eleanor corrected gently. "Not her keeper. There's a difference." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally Donovan drained his glass and stood. "I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch, introduce you to the hands, get you oriented to how things work around here." "James," Eleanor said as he reached the doorway. He turned back to her. "Thank you for today, for the choice you gave me, for bringing me here. I know this arrangement is unconventional, but I want you to know that I don't take your trust lightly." His expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Eleanor, for taking a chance on us." After he left, Eleanor remained by the dying fire for a while longer, trying to make sense of her feelings. She had expected to feel like an intruder in Catherine's house, an inadequate replacement for a beloved wife and mother. Instead, she felt welcomed, needed, valued for herself, rather than as a poor substitute for someone else. Perhaps, she thought as she finally made her way upstairs to her beautiful room, with its view of the mountains, this arrangement might work out better than any of them had dared to hope.